Got it?
Okay. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals, public review session for June 3rd, 2019. We'll begin with the appeals calendar decision items. Item number 1, 2018-166A, 40-31 82nd Street, Queens.
Yeah, so this, as everyone knows, this hearing is closed. So I'd like the commissioners at tomorrow's, what we call executive session, because it's a closed hearing, to each make a clear statement about the reasons for their vote before they cast it. So I'd recommend that they write it down so it's clear and carefully reasoned. Each commissioner should respond to the specific question presented by appellant. That is, does the zoning resolution direct that floor space in the cellar be counted as floor area, quote, floor area, with respect to the size of a retail establishment? And is the proposed use at the subject site a use group 6 variety store, which is a permitted use in the subject zoning district, or a use group 10 department store, which is not a permitted use in the district? Okay, so you'll read your rationale and then cast your vote tomorrow. Okay.
That's it. Next. Item number, special order calendar, item number 2, 17706BZ, 1840 Richmond Terrace, Staten Island.
Okay. We received photographs of the parking lot resurfaced, and I think it looks excellent. And I just want to say I very much appreciate the cooperative responsiveness of this applicant and owner. They really responded each time we had a comment. They went and fixed that thing, and now the site looks really good.
Item number 3, continued hearing items, 15673BZ, 1975 Eastchester Road, the Bronx.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 4, 13292BZ, 3948 Amboy Road, Staten Island.
Actually, I didn't find anything submitted on this. Did anybody?
There's only an FDNY letter of objection.
Which was already submitted at the last hearing. Right.
That's it.
That was it. So I don't understand what happened. There's nothing.
So administratively adjourned?
It has to be adjourned because there's zero for us to talk about. And this would be the second hearing.
Number 3, 3948 Amboy Road.
Go ahead.
Are we talking about the letter from the last hearing, or this is?
Yeah, so in other words, you know, when we look at the folders to see what to read, the only thing that looked new was fire department, but then you look at it and I had that letter already on my prior comments, so.
Item number 5, 12693BZ, 1225 East 233rd Street, the Bronx.
Sorry. So there was a May 23rd submission on this with no cover letter. It was just a set of plans submitted. And we had many, many issues with this site, so I don't want to adjourn it, although the submission is incomplete because the site was so problematic. And because the site's so problematic, I don't want to adjourn it. I want to just continue. But so there would have been a cover letter to respond to issues. But let me just finish, Darrell. But from what I can make out by comparing the submitted plans with the prior set, and it's a little bit like a Where's Waldo thing. You take one and you look at the other and you try to see what's different, which should have been done with a cover letter. It's proposed to, it's more than proposed. It looks like the work was actually done when you look at the photographs that are part of that set. So, but it's shown as proposed to install a new 6-foot white fence on adjacent retaining wall, but the material isn't specified and should be on the drawings, but when you look at the photographs, it's clear that it's a PVC kind of stockade fence, which is what we talked about at the hearing, that it should be that kind of fence. It's kind of a residential style. They also showed adding a planting bed along the shared property line. The depth of the planting beds aren't specified, but we discussed at the last hearing that they should be 5 feet deep with a barrier, dense hedge barrier. So the landscaping plan needs to identify that. The amount shown in the photos is relatively sparse. I mean, there's a regularity of these shrubs, but they really should be installed alternately, so you fill in the gaps between the trees, and it looks like there's enough room for them to do that still. We also needed sectional details on the planting beds. I don't know, I don't remember whether they provided curbs on these beds, but they need to have curbs. And there's a minimum soil depth. We need to know what that is, because otherwise you plant the tree and then it dies in, one season. So we just need to understand better the density of the shrubs that were actually planted on the drawings, and I think a row should be added to the front that alternates with the row that's at the back. They did provide, as requested, a lumen spread diagram that shows the lumens are high too near the adjoining property line, so it needs to be 0 at the property line, not 0 4 feet into the property line. That sort of seems to be an affectation of one of those lumen programs where it measures them at some distance apart, which always ends up being deep into the residential property before you get a measurement. The photos provided don't show tires stored at the site, but then they aren't 360-degree images, and there was no aerial image to see what's going on actually on the roof, which is where we saw satellite revealing tires like everywhere and even on the roof of the building. I didn't find sign calculations, although there are elevations showing signs and dimensions. So our compliance officer went out in March and did a whole series of photos, so I'd actually like him to go back and do another inspection on that. So if we could ask Ted. Okay, and Darrell, you wanted to add something?
They made a submission over the weekend. I saw it this morning, but I haven't had a chance to look at it because I requested additional information. But I don't know what they
You don't
submitted.
know what it
yet.
is? Okay, well, I don't know that we'll have time to review it
Right.
between now and then, so the applicant should present whatever they are submitting. Any other comments on this?
So I just want to add that I had gone on a site visit towards the end of April, and based on that, what I had noticed that they had already made a lot of the improvements that we had asked them to do. The tires were removed from the site and from the roof of the building. And as the photographs show it, the plantings and those were already in place. What's not in the drawing is the location of the trash dumpster.
Yeah.
And that's not indicated in the plan. And as part of the landscaping, the ground covering along Deramere Avenue has not been provided, because that is the one that has the most amount of green space, yet the hedges that's been provided, it's kind of sparse, and there should be a little bit more land covering. Like it could be just very grade kind of foliage.
Yeah,
and
that's
that-
ground cover.
Right, and that would be sufficient. I have comments on the signage. They need to indicate the total surface area of each sign and indicate if they are illuminated or non-illuminated. And the total signage analysis chart for frontage has not been provided. And the locations of signs B and C are not clear and are not the exact sign dimensions and the surface area as indicated in the plan. And also based on the photos provided, the signs need to include the awning over the store and the sign over the second repair bay. With regards to the lumen, I'm not sure, maybe I'm not looking at the plans properly, but
It's
I
on
s-
this far left side. You
Right.
see the lumens are high near the shrubs, but they
But
don't.
there's zero.
But there's
at the-
zero, but that's deep into the property. The idea is that at the property line, it should measure 0, and you don't know whether at the property line it measures 0.
Okay, so that's
Because
the
you don't know
question.
what the fall off is, and it's one thing if it's starting off, if it's, 3 foot inside the subject property and it's at .02, good guess that the fall off is 0 by the time you get to the property line. That's what's happening on the right side. But on the left side,
It's
it's pretty
not-
high, so you don't know how
Okay.
long it's going to
I
take to
understand the
fall
point.
off.
Okay, those were my comments.
Okay.
I did drive by as well, and it appears the tire business is out of business now, so it's no longer in the back. And all of those racks were removed. I didn't get a chance to really see what was on the roof because I was at grade.
Right.
Well,
Next time, bring your drone.
Actually, I was, as I was driving, so I was trying to see if I could see over the thing. So I do confess, I didn't climb the roof.
No?
But I tried to see it from a different vantage point to see if I was seeing any heaps of tires over there.
Right, but actually, when in the satellite photo, they stayed calmly below the parapet line, so I don't see how you could see them unless you climbed on the roof of something else, or brought your drone with you, which is another option.
Maybe we should get a BSA.
Yeah, PSA drone. Ted could be in charge. Okay, all right, thank you.
Item number 6, 303-12BZ, 1106, 1108 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, the applicant clarified that off-site parking was not a condition of the 2014 grant, although it was discussed in the resolution, but apparently not relied upon by the board as material to the grant. 34 parking spaces are supposed to be provided on site, so the zoning waiver was 6 spaces. And the construction timeline provided showed 24-month period, and they're asking for a 4-year extension, which I think is reasonable because nothing takes the 24 months you predict. Plus, the C of O is a very slow process.
Yeah, and I appreciate the clarification that we made. And I think that
Yeah.
was what threw me off in the resolution, because there was reference to it, and the previous resolution also had it, so I
Yeah.
thought it was kind of carrying forward.
Right.
Maybe in our
I think that it
resolution
was-
going forward, we can clarify.
It was
that history.
actually a different grant. The 2008 or whatever it was a different grant than the 2014. So
Right.
they actually applied for a parking waiver in
Right.
2014, and they didn't apply for one
In the previous one.
in the previous one. That's my understanding anyway.
Item number 7, 27713BZ, 1769 Fort George Hill, Manhattan.
The applicant made the requested clarifications to the plans, so actually, my only question is whether Commissioner Otley Brown is satisfied with the financial information that was provided to support the E finding.
Yes, I am satisfied. They gave a narrative that explained why the extra 20 units were necessary to meet the E finding. And basically, in summary, it talks about how the project shifted from a mix and match where market rate housing rents would offset the affordable housing rents to a 100% affordable project, which can't rely on the market rents to help offset the construction costs. And then they talked about the funding sources for the proposed project and how they were based on a per-unit basis, and so that if the number of units were capped, they would be in a deficit of $7.3 million, and that providing more units in a similar footprint, they were able to get more funding to cover the construction of that same building or similar-sized building. So I was satisfied with their reasoning.
Okay. Anybody else on this one?
Yeah, we did ask last hearing, like for providing a note on the plans indicating that the rear yard would be minimum 10 feet all
Yes,
across.
they did, actually.
Did you see that?
So the problem is that the plans are a little bit complicated. They show several versions of a site plan, and you have to keep digging until you find the site plan that actually dimensions the rear yard in several places.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, so it was kind of like site plan number 4 or something like that.
Okay.
And when we're stamping the drawings, we can probably edit out some of those because they're redundant. I'm not really sure even what some of them are for. But they did provide it. I also searched, where's the part
Thank
that
you.
says 10 feet?
Move on.
Yeah.
New cases, item number 8, 689859BZ, 2773 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. There are no notice requirements for extensions of time. We do have fire department sign-off. They request a 2-year extension of time to obtain a C of O, really, because the construction is actually complete, whereas it says on the description says
Yeah.
time to complete construction, it's really time to obtain a C of O.
Yeah.
It's not serious. The applicant's photo number 6, though, doesn't look like the plan in that there is a large container, which may be the dumpster enclosure, but I don't think so. There's a wide sidewalk and an ice dispenser. The container sits in front of trash cans, because you can see them sort of sneaking behind, which are supposed to be kept in the trash enclosure. The area behind the enclosure was, according to the plan, supposed to have been landscaped to protect the adjacent resident. That area actually looks exactly like the existing conditions drawing, so is not in compliance with the terms of the grant, even though the chart about compliance says that it is. I wish the people who prepare these compliance charts would actually check whether the sites are in compliance instead of just saying that they are. Also, in the middle of the landscape area, there's a very large landscape area. There's some type of equipment, which may be the remediation equipment that I understood was supposed to be removed, but maybe it can't be removed. I'm not sure what it is. It says Kohler on it, which I associate with making toilets and sinks. I didn't know they do remediation equipment, or maybe it's a different Kohler, but anyway. So our compliance officer actually went out to the site and took photos, which revealed, because the photos provided to us by the applicant were taken in January, for whatever reason. So they're old photos, but the site visit by our compliance officer shows full spring landscaping, and it looks fantastic. There's all these beautiful flowers in bloom. The site looks very clean. The photograph, though, did reveal that there are 2 street tree planting beds that were surrounded by one of those little cast iron low fences that have been completely demolished by cars, and there's no trees there. So the only way you prevent a car from driving over the planting bed is to plant a tree, which is shown on the drawings. So they need to take those broken fences out and plant trees. And then also they have a lot of miscellaneous banners that are sort of stuck in the ground here and there. Those count as signs. So to the extent they exceed the sign limitations, they have to be removed. And also, I noticed that there's a vacuum and air pump that's shown on the drawing, so it's allowed to be there, but the hoses don't have anywhere to go, so they just throw them on the ground for cars to drive over, so they should provide just some place where you can hook the hoses and they don't like run out onto the ground and create potential hazard. And those are my comments. Anybody else?
You picked up on 2 of my comments. I think there are 4 new tree pits that were proposed, and those are missing. At least based on the floor plan, site plan that we had approved and the photos provided, and Google Street View, there are 4 street trees that need to be provided.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is a construction that has been complete.
Yeah.
And this is a request, like the chair said, it's not to complete construction, it's to obtain CFO.
Right.
In cases like this, I'm wondering, would we ask for certification from the architect that whatever construction was done was in compliance with the BSA approved drawings and the DUB requirements? Would that something that we wanna-
But you'll see, because we have a series of these, I'm asking for the applicant to show compliance with the drawings and the approval as we go, right? So, and as you can see, we get these certifications, and then you look at the drawings and you look at the photographs, and they don't look like each other. So the certifications only go so far because it appears that people are willing to certify without doing a site visit or something, you know? So it would need to be, if we were going to have an architect certify, which I don't think is a bad idea, it would be that I went on a site visit.
Yeah.
And I certified that based on my site visit, it looks like the approved drawings, right?
The as-built is equivalent to
Yes.
whatever was approved.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so, we need to see actually that they make the change that's required, so it looks like the drawings, because they were gonna go ahead, pull C of O, and then we wouldn't find out for 10 years that they never made the correction that they were supposed to do in the back, right? Okay.
Yep. Item number 9, 6791BZ, 5455 Little Neck Parkway, Queens.
Okay. As with the previous one, there are no notice requirements for extensions of time. Fire department issued a conditional letter of no objection and will conduct inspections. There's some outstanding issues that fire department will be vigilant about. The construction is complete. This time it's properly described as they're just asking for time to obtain a C of O, and they want an extension of for 2 years to do that. But like the previous application, the applicant doesn't go through the conditions to show how they have been met, although the photos show the site to be very clean. And like the previous application, there is this storage container that looks similar to the one at the prior application. However, there's a photo taken from above that shows that there are dumpsters stored inside of that container. I can't tell whether the container is sized as shown on the approved plans. It arguably is bigger, but I don't actually know. And again, the landscaping plan that was approved shows that landscaping should have extended behind the trash enclosure to protect the adjoining property, and it doesn't appear to have been done according to the photos that were provided. In fact, there looks like might have been an air conditioning system installed there that's not shown on the drawings. So the whole idea is what we're trying to do is create buffer zones with the residential property, and they're taking advantage of these dumpster enclosures that conceal everything to not do that and just like put stuff back there, which is the stuff that was supposed to go back there was landscaping. And they have a vacuum, but I didn't find that on the approved plans. On the approved plans, there are a few squares. One of those squares might have been a vacuum, but it's not labeled as such. So it needs to be labeled as such if everyone's okay with having it. Yeah, but it's like next to a residence, I think. So normally we don't like the vacuums to be next to residents. That's a residential property there, right? So that's like the most annoying thing, other than a car wash.
Well, I think that was then, this is a blank wall, there aren't any windows fronting on that.
Maybe, there might be windows above, I don't know. And if you're sitting in your backyard, unless they could show us that you don't hear the vacuum, you would hear it, right? It's a blank wall
It's
of
a
what,
blank
of a
wall.
commercial building or a residential building?
It's senior housing,
Even better.
and the backyard
The
is
vacuum
further.
for people who have trouble sleeping and maybe sleep during the day. Not the best place for a vacuum. Anyway, okay.
I
Anybody
had
else?
a question, I think at the last hearing, when we had approved it, at the last approval, there was a community ask, and that was to provide an intercom button for assistance
Yeah.
and honking, and
Right.
there wasn't any documentation provided confirming that that's in place, so if
Right.
the applicant can provide that, that would be
Yeah.
helpful.
So it's actually, what I wanted them to do, there's a lot of conditions of approval. I want them to go through all the conditions, right? There's a big list. It says there shall be a hunt for assistance system, it's a help button, landscaping, no sale of cars on the lot, no parking of cars on the sidewalk, no parking on the landscaped area at the rear of the site, no storage of vehicles on the lot, no automotive repairs, all fencing in accordance with plans, existing picket fence painted, all site lighting directed downward and away from residential uses, and free of debris. So they should be going through all the conditions in addition to checking that it looks like the drawings. I think that needs to be just standard for all these extensions. It's an opportunity, once the site's built, for us to check that it was built according to the terms. Okay.
Item number 10, 2108BZ, 1601 Bronxdale Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. We didn't get anything from the community board and need that.
I reached
Fire-
out to them, but I haven't heard anything.
Okay. Fire department issued a conditional letter of no objection, but the gym is severely behind in complying with the requirement to obtain an operating permit and maintain a fire alarm system. So though the fire department is allowing this to move forward, they state that failure to fulfill these requirements will result in their request to this board to revoke the permit. So rather than go through all that, I'd rather find out from the applicant what remains to be done and what they intend to do to rectify the situation, since they've been operating for 12 years in this illegal state. Fire department's letter obviously disagrees with applicant's statement in their statement of facts that the fire and sprinkler alarms are operational. In fact, the statement of facts says that they are operable, whatever that means. And the fire department actually issued a violation that says interior fire alarm system in trouble mode in violation of Fire Code 901.6. They also proposed changes in hours of operation, just for one. It says the approved hours were Monday to Thursday, 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., Friday, 5:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Everything is the same, except there's an earlier closing on Sunday at 6 p.m. And they don't offer massage services anymore. Anybody else?
Yeah, actually, in the statement of facts, they didn't say that the fire alarm is operational or operable. They said we will provide an affidavit.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, an affidavit to
Yes,
show that it's operable?
Indicating
Oh.
it is. So this is the beauty of legal writing here.
Yes, indeed.
This is one thing. The other thing is, I did read in the statement of facts, a statement indicating it's responding, actually, it's not in the statement of facts. It's a response to a notice of comment that I didn't see in the folder, but it's saying no sound insulation measures needed because the adjacent is commercial. This shouldn't be taken for granted, even if
Right.
the adjacent is commercial. If it's an office building and you have noise, I have the right to be in my office
you're right.
and enjoy my life. It doesn't mean that this is a commercial use. They should be tortured. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight this. And I didn't see any like interior photos provided. So
You didn't see any what?
interior pictures, photos, just for outside.
Yeah,
So if we can get some,
okay.
that would be appreciated.
And in terms of the sound attenuation, I think as we've been having these difficult gyms, we're learning more and more that everything needs to be attenuated, because as you say, if I'm working in my office, I shouldn't hear the thumping of the music and the dropping of the weights and so on. It's, you know.
The criteria for
Yeah.
office buildings could be
But it's a
different.
different sensitivity
Yes.
level, because I'm not sleeping at 5 a.m.,
Yeah.
right?
But this is an extension of term.
This is,
So it
yes.
should be perhaps posting in the office lobby if there's anybody who has a problem.
Right.
But I don't know if we should rip this down to the studs and rebuild
No,
it
no,
with
no.
sound attenuation
Yeah.
just because it's an office building and it may not have a problem. So let's first see if there's a problem.
no, I'm
I think
not- I'm
we
not
should
saying that.
extension of
I'm
term.
not
He's
saying
just
that.
talking about this as a general subject, because in the resolution, it said no attenuation was necessary because it's in a commercial building, and it's true, when I review these things and I see it's a one-story gym in a two-story commercial building, I don't get nervous that we're gonna have people up at 5 a.m. But the idea that all of these gyms should, going forward, have sound attenuation is just a good policy, right? Unless it's a quiet use, right? So it's not to go back and looking at, tearing apart something unless there were complaints from neighbors. That'd be a different thing.
Right,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I understand your point, but I think it's better made in the new calendar and
Yeah.
not in the SOC calendar,
okay.
where we're talking about extensions of
Yes,
term.
okay,
It's
fair.
just-
But it certainly would help out to know if there is a problem with it by posting notice.
That's
So-
what I said.
Yeah. So we often don't, so there's no, yeah. We don't have anything from the community board, so that might help us. But yeah, we can post notice. We can have, sorry, Carl?
No, again, not to rebut what was being said, but it is an M11 zoning district. I just wanted to just bring attention to that, that's all.
Right. Yeah, but at the same time, there are performance standards in an M11, right? And noise codes that even apply in an M11.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Yes, the criteria could be different between residential and commercial. However, it should be, again, taken for granted that if you have a commercial use, you need to do nothing. It shouldn't be taken like that.
so should we have them post notice?
That's what I
I
was,
For
think
the
that would be
neighbors?
sufficient, yeah.
Because they haven't done it, so that means one more hearing for them. That's why we don't normally do that for the commercial uses. We do it definitely for the residential uses. Without going for an extension, we always ask them to post, but we don't normally for the commercial.
we could have them if they, just so they wouldn't have to come back again, if they want to circle an affidavit to the tenants.
Yes.
Have them sign the affidavit saying that there isn't a noise issue, that they have no noise complaints. And if they're willing to sign that, then we can get this done tomorrow. If they're not willing to sign it, then we have reason to hold over.
Okay, it's a lot of work to do in one day. I think it's actually not fair to be imposing these new things
I
on
agree.
them. We can say, going forward, in fact, I want to make it going forward that any extension on a gym should be notification to neighbors, because we don't have that as an official notice, that all the project managers require that the building occupants be notified with posting in the lobby, and that way we don't have to have this kind of maybe we do, maybe we don't. But I don't think it's fair to impose a whole new thing on these guys when we haven't been doing it with anybody else, right?
I agree.
We imposed it on some of the residential ones because we had complaints. And then having had complaints, we said, just to be safe, we should do it on all the residential ones, right? But we haven't had that issue on commercial sites, so we can, from now on, going forward, require posting in the building of all extensions on PCs, and that'll make it just easier, cleaner. Okay?
Item number 11, 27113BZ, 129 Norfolk Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, there are no notice requirements for an extension of time. The last hearing was postponed for failure to respond to notice of comments according to the submission schedule. According to the photos, work is very far along on the site with the facades finished and the windows installed. So what's the need for a 4-year extension of time to complete construction? Also, they should provide as-built to show compliance with the approved plans. So I think 4 years is far too long. If we need to find out how far, where construction is, because it looks like basically all they have to do is finish the driveway and kind of install the front door and maybe the back door, which is a construction access point. And I can't tell how much work is done on the interior, but the facades are completely done and all the windows are in, so 4 years sounds too much. Okay.
Appeals calendar decision items, item number 12, 2018-23A and 2018-24A, 29 and 31 Herbert Street, Staten Island.
Okay, so, the only thing we're trying to do is clean up the restrictive deck. The diagram that's attached to the deck needs to be the site plan that shows the same extent of work in front of Lot 1 as is required by the builder's pavement plan, which is a 10-foot sidewalk plus an improved roadbed to 20 feet from the curb line, which is very different from the diagram that was attached to the restrictive deck. So we want it to be consistent, and we want it to meet DOT standards. I didn't find fire department sign off on this.
There was a communication between myself and fire department and the applicant. The fire department just wanted them to amend the curb-to-curb width of Herbert from 32.4, I believe, to 34 feet.
Oh,
But maybe they can speak
Can you
to
say that
tomorrow.
again?
The fire department, there was a provision about the width of Herbert And fire department was quoted in the restrictive deck as saying that they wanted a width of 32.4 feet, but actually they prefer a width of 34 feet.
Okay. So one of the things that I noted on the, whichever plan that is, that it's a 50-foot wide
It's like max.
map street, right? So when you measure, however that's measured, whether you get the 34 curb to curb, like if they're paving to 20 feet plus 10, they're only getting, they're getting 30, that's not curb, that's only 20 curb to whatever,
Okay.
right? So arguably, that would give you the 40 feet, give you even 40 feet curb to curb. So I don't know, I just don't know what the layout allows, so fire department needs to just check.
There's a fire department
Yeah.
letter, we got a fire department letter
Oh, you did?
On Sunday.
Which says?
on Sunday.
Oh.
I think L'Oreal basically said what it said.
They want 34 feet?
I didn't see it,
Okay.
but thanks. I didn't see it.
Okay,
I just
so
spoke to the
there's-
fire department on Friday.
Yeah, they said the fire department wishes to correct its letter of April 3rd, 2019, and that the dimension shown in item 6B incorrectly shows the minimum curb-to-curb distance, which shall be 32 feet. The dimension should be 34 feet.
Okay.
The mistake has been brought to the attention of the applicant, who has agreed to correct the declaration.
Great.
Yeah.
Prior to filing the declaration, department has no objection for the board to render a decision on this application.
Oh, okay,
So the only outstanding thing then would be the exhibit.
right, okay. All right.
Item, zoning calendar, continued hearing items, item number 13, 7715BZ, 244-3680 Fifth Avenue, Queens.
So this application actually has been changed from a 7221 variance to a 73621 special permit to allow the enlargement of the second floor. This was done because the board concluded at its last hearing, which was a long time ago, that the 7221 findings actually couldn't be made. The plans show an increase of 420 square feet over the existing for a total of 1,942 square feet, which represents less than 10% over the allowable of 1,900 square feet, which is 0.5 FAR, so it's less than the extra 10% that's allowed. My problem, though, with the application, because it's a very modest enlargement, is that I don't believe 73-621 overcomes the prohibition against enlargements of non-conforming uses. This is an existing two-family house in an R2A, where two-family homes are not a permitted use. The prior statement of facts, the one that was attached to the 7221 application, explained the need for a variance because an enlargement of a non-conforming use is not permitted under section 52-22. The new statement of facts doesn't mention this and doesn't explain how 73-621 overcomes it. Maybe it does, I don't know. I don't think so. Section 52-41 clarifies, just to make it, just to be super clear that this applies in this case, 5241 clarifies that an enlargement of a non-conforming residential building is not permitted in an R2. It doesn't actually state it in those words, it says it's permitted in an R3. So it's leaving out an R2 and an R1. So the DOB objection sheet includes that as one of the objections, but the cover letter submitted by the applicant states that the other objections that don't have to do with floor area are, quote, procedural. That's hardly procedural, that's substantive. So I don't understand, other than to try to get us to overlook this little detail. So I actually, and at the last hearing, we discussed the fact that the interior of the two apartments are being gutted to allow for this upgrade, the layout's completely different. So I don't see how we can move forward on this unless the proposal is to change the use to a single family, which was the issue in the variance application. We said, why can't you just change it to a single family, and then most of the objections go away, right? So in this case, you could have a single family, enlarge it by 10%, and we could move forward, but I just don't see how this works for a non-conforming use.
The project has a CO. The building has a CO for a two-family DU from 1946.
Non-conforming
So it's a
use.
non-conforming use.
Yeah.
So
Lawful non-conforming
It's a
use.
legally, it's a grandfathered use.
Yes.
So, I'm wondering if that is the document that the applicant is relying on to kind of say the objection that DOB has issued regarding it being a two-family is just
But they're
No, no,
permitted
no.
to continue the use, they're just not permitted to
Yes.
expand the use.
So
Right.
DOB's objection is ZR 52-21, no structural
No, I get that.
alteration shall be made in a building or other structure substantially occupied by a non-conforming use. So and 73-621 says it's available for enlargement for a complying or non-complying building existing in 1961 or 1989, depending on where you are, and containing residential uses. So it's only applying to complying or non-complying buildings. It doesn't say conforming or non-conforming, right? And then you go to 52-21 that tells you no structural alterations, and you go to 52-41 that says you can enlarge a non-complying residential building of of 1 and 2 family if you're in an R3, but not an R2. That's my problem. And I don't understand at all the reasoning for this, because these are just 10% enlargements and so on, but they didn't want to increase the degree of nonconformance. That was the issue.
So the section further states 7621 says for a complying or non-complying building existing on December 15, 1961 or in R2X, R3, R4 or R5 district on June 30, 89 and containing residential use, BSA may permit an enlargement, a change of use, or an extension, provided that such enlargement, change of use or extension shall not create. So is that what they're relying, that they can allow for change of use?
They're not
It's
proposing to change
they're not
the use.
proposing to change it. They
They're
want to keep the
maintaining it.
They're maintaining
two-family
the use,
house,
okay.
right? Which is an existing non-conforming house,
Right.
right? And they brought this up, actually, during a variance that was in their statement of facts. They went through a whole thing about how it's not permitted to enlarge a building that has 2 families. So we said at that hearing, then change it to a 1-family, what's your hardship, right? So, okay.
Move on? Item number 14, 26315BZ, 4547 Little Clove Road, Staten Island.
Okay, this application has actually been at the agency for nearly 3.5 years. It received a dismissal warning letter during the pre-hearing notice of comment process, and another after the 3rd adjournment in March, so we need to move this, right? There are 6 open ECB violations, but the fines have been written off. The padlock order for the trailer remains on biz, although the applicant states that there's no longer a trailer on the premises, so it's kind of an obsolete order. The principal issue that we faced with this site was how traffic circulation was going to be addressed given drop-offs to the medical office. The community board was opposed to the project, and the borough president expressed reservations for the reasons that have to do with the drop-offs clogging up Little Cove Road, and actually presenting a real problem, apparently. At the last hearing in August of 2018, we discussed the long ramps to the new proposed building, and that they should be eliminated by dropping the building to grade, in part to make it look more residential, because it makes it look very institutional with these long ramps. That wasn't done, and the explanation in the statement of facts is that the ramps are needed, quote, due to the elevations of the proposed basement and first floor, unquote. This is new construction. The survey shows the site is flat from the top of the curb all the way to the parking lot, so it's not like you're adjusting for a slope. No sections were provided for the proposed building, but based on the elevation, the basement appears to be at approximately 5 feet below grade. That is something like a 50-foot-long ramp down to the cellar and up to the first floor, which clogs both side yards to allow access from the parking lot, because the ramps are taking you from the parking lot, right? So we now have plans as requested of the existing medical office that's at 47 Little Cove Road on the corner. It is built at grade without ramps. The main access to that building is from Little Cove Road. And you have to walk around the building to get to the front door if you park in the parking lot. There is a side door that looks like it's really for staff access, which would require you to walk from the parking lot to the side, but then you're not passing through the waiting room, and I doubt that a medical office would let patients come directly in that way because it's not a disabled entrance. So there's no door directly from the parking lot. So I don't understand at all why the proposed building can't also be built at grade, other than for preference not to excavate further, which doesn't make any sense to me. You don't even need a cellar, but that other building has a cellar. The C of O for 47 Little Cove Road is from 2009, which predates the 2010 Lower Density Growth Management Area Text Amendment, requiring that cellar space be included in the parking calculations, so it wasn't included in parking calculations. The CO for that building requires a total of 6 spaces, 2 of which are for the residential unit above. So I know that and I'm saying this because that parking was a big subject for the community board and the borough president. The other subject discussed at length by this board was the impact that the existing facilities are having on traffic and circulation, especially along Little Cove Road, which was again discussed by community board and borough president. The plans of the 47 and 45 Little Cove show that the front entrances are on Little Cove, not Cayuga. And as already discussed at the last hearing, drop-offs are and will continue to be in front of the facility on Little Cove. We stated that a front yard drop-off should be provided, and there is no reason why not, as far as I can tell, since there's already a curb cut for the existing parking garage that's adjacent to 45 Little Cove, which is a house. So it takes you to the house's parking garage. It's 12-foot wide curb cut. Arguably, you might apply to make it wider so you have a 2-way curb cut, or it's a 1-way curb cut with a loop around that takes you outside. Instead, we were shown a so-called drop-off in the parking lot itself, which takes up 2 really necessary parking spaces that were shown on the first set of drawings. And first of all, I don't think this even works because it makes the parking lot very difficult to maneuver in. And I don't think it addresses the borough president's and community board's concerns at all. And I don't think it will do anything to alleviate the obvious inconvenience of dropping off at the front door of the doctor's office. So the only real response we received, as far as I'm concerned, is the addition of planting along the east property line that's shared with residential uses and between the 2 buildings, and the open space comparison study that shows the amount of open space provided is in line with the neighbors. That was something we asked for because it's a finding. Zoning calculations were provided showing the amount of paved areas on this lot comply with section 23-142, which has to do with not more than 50% of the open space being covered with parking. We did ask for an analysis of the percentage of landscaping to zoning lot area compared to other neighborhood lots and didn't receive it. The borough president also asked for more landscaping between the 47 building and Cayuga, which was also not provided. And so I have to say, given how long we've been here, we need either a commitment at tomorrow's hearing from the applicant on behalf of the owner that the changes we requested last August will be made and in short order. In other words, like by the next hearing, which will be like a month from now, or we just close and vote on the application that's been not responsive to us.
Yeah, that's it.
Any other comments on this?
I agree with your comments with regards to the drop-off. I don't think the proposed plan anyway alleviates the issue of discouraging patients from being dropped off at along Little Cove Road. And I think the orientation of these pathways and roadways from Little Cove need to be removed. I mean, this is similar to another project that we had done that was on Fresh Meadows, where we had asked the applicant to completely change the orientation of the drop-off and pickup, if that would discourage people from being, and that is the roadmap they need to use here in some ways to keep vehicles from being dropped.
So that doesn't work on the existing building. You have lot 47, you have 47, the front door is facing Little Cove.
Right.
So
We can't change the existing one, but the proposed one, the signage that is here doesn't need to be there.
But how would you, I mean, if you're coming, how would you drop off? There's a parking lot. So you can't drive into the parking lot and do a U-turn and drop people off in the parking lot, because that makes the parking lot not usable. It's not a big enough parking lot to do that, right? So if you're saying move the entrance to the medical office to the back of the building, for example, of this new building, for example, how would anybody access that in a drop-off mode? That's the
I
problem
saw
I
this more
have.
as like you park like it's a parking space and then you just make a Y-turn and come out of it. So to me, the parking drop-off, the U-turn was not a necessary factor for the drop-off. The fact that a specific designated drop-off area has been provided, it's good, but it needs to be used and it needs to be clearly known for those who are visiting that patient drop-off and pickup has to be in the parking lot and not along Little Cove Road. And that can be done more through landscaping and treatments that prevents people from wanting to use the Little Cove as the main entry point. And one simple plan, the change in the plan where the elevator for the proposed building, there is an elevator, which I don't understand. If there is an elevator, why need a ramp? The elevator is...
Because they have one access from the parking lot and one from the street.
Well, that's the thing. So to remove the access from the street and place the elevator close to the parking lot entrance, and that way you do away with the ramp and you also allow for the elevator to access the basement and the ground floor, and everything is at grade level, and prevent the entryway from the main entrance. And if there is a need to connect the existing medical office to the proposed one, it shouldn't be from the front lawn as shown in the plan. It should be more from the center line, because the existing building does have a pathway that there's an access way.
No, that one takes you right inside the medical treatment area. So that's the problem. A medical office doesn't allow patients to walk inside of the treatment area. You must enter into the...
I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that the need for this connection between these, because there's a waiting area and then all the exams rooms are back there.
Right.
There's a door connecting.
Between those two. Yeah.
Those two, and the center door and the side could be used to provide that physical connection between the new building that's more in the middle of the block, not in the front of the block.
Mm-hmm.
And that also prevents or discourages the pathway along the front, along Little Park.
So my
Cove,
problem with turning the building around is then you have the back of the building facing the public way. So, because it'll end up being back of house, because that's the layout, right? You have a long corridor and back of house is at the back. And so, I have a problem urbanistically with that, because it's supposed to look like a residential neighborhood, right? And the design of the building is residential, which is way different than what we had with that other project where it was such a big building and we were trying to bring its scale into something that looks residential. This one's sort of ideal in that it's got two little houses that happen to be medical offices on their own little lots. So, and you don't want to design it in a way that's confusing, where it looks like there's a front door, but there's no door. Because people will drop off and say, oh, how do I get in here? And they'll do the drop off and then start wandering around not knowing where to go. So, did you want to add something?
I just think that there's a conflict here, because based on the findings, you want to increase the amount of landscaped area so that it fits in with the residential neighborhood, yet you want to have some kind of a drop-off that's on their property, which is going to be more concrete. So the other option would be one of those lay-bys where you're cutting in minimally into your landscape area so that you can pull cars off of Little Cove Road, but not really onto the property.
That's a good idea.
That might solve the problem, and then you could increase the landscaping in both front yards and make it more lush.
That's a good idea.
Go. Let me know you're ready.
Yeah, just a second. Anybody else? Commissioner Shabeta, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was concerned with the turning of the building around, because I don't believe that would satisfy the findings, particularly C of the findings, because it
Could you
wouldn't relate.
speak up? Sorry.
Turning the building around, I think it's a great idea, but I don't think it would fit with C of the findings, because it wouldn't relate to the other buildings in the neighborhood. But I do agree with Commissioner Otley Brown's suggestion.
So a lay-by then would be on, somehow though, that would affect the curb, the sidewalk, right?
Right, so it would shift in a little bit on their lot, but it won't take up as much space as if
As
you
a
put a
full
whole
loop.
driveway with curb cuts in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right. Okay.
Item number 15, 2016-4153BZ, 4701 19th Avenue, Brooklyn.
We received a letter of support from council members Deutsch and Yeager, who submitted other letters of support in the past. That letter, it's a combined letter, and the submission by applicant's counsel effectively beseeches the board to ignore the effect of the proposed corporate merger that would have resulted in the subject entity's ownership of both lots, and to ignore the board's mandate to make all of the 7221 findings. The letter from council members implies that the board is somehow taking out its ire on the applicant. Not at all. We need to make findings. It's as simple as that. And common ownership of adjoining properties is one of the issues about hardship that we look at. At our hearing in February, where the board learned of the proposed corporate merger, the concern of self-created hardship was reignited. It is clear from all of the paperwork submitted, both before, since, and so on, that the relationship between these two claimed entities is completely fluid, which for me underscores the fact that ownership is merely opting not, preferring not, to develop the two lots in tandem, which is actually what is said in the submitted papers. We don't want to. Self-created hardship basics are adjacent commonly held properties. That is what we have here. And Cornell deference doesn't overcome this, which we've discussed in another case, right? We provided, I thought, a really great opportunity for the applicant to prove that its programmatic needs wouldn't be met on a combined lot, but it opted not to take that option, which I just don't understand. Instead, there's a 15-page letter from a lawyer instead of what could have been some sketches that show how programmatic needs might not be met by a combined use of synagogue and this program. So I have to say, so although the other findings have arguably been met, the D finding hasn't been, so I'm not sure what to do.
I was surprised because they started making that argument at the last hearing. I was expecting to see more of that in writing with regard to this needs to be an independent institution, and I thought we were going to get something more like that, but I didn't see any of that.
They didn't make it. They said instead, don't make us do it, or we
Right.
don't need to.
They're standing on a principle which is kind of resistant to the board's being able to use their right to investigate different options and also to make each of the findings independently. And I don't really understand what the point of that was, because they could have been done and gone
Yes.
already. And probably with less work than it has
Yes.
taken to mount this argument.
Yes. Right. And, frankly, when I try to do the sketch in my head, I don't know what the argument is. So I don't sketch the argument. In my head, I can sketch that the two things can live together. But I'm not the applicant. I'm not the synagogue, right? They know what they need in a way that we don't know, right? And so without actually doing those sketches, all we're doing is imagining that a synagogue would work great on the lower level of this building that's wider, and actually it'd be a much cheaper building to build, by the way, ultimately. 2 buildings with less circulation, et cetera, better floor plates. Yeah, anyway. And they don't need to share, because you could have separate entrances and so on. That's what I imagine. So they need to persuade me that that doesn't work.
Right, by giving us a full explanation. It's not enough to assume that we're going to be instinctive about this.
Right.
Which is an argument I've raised on other issues for other findings. It's like, don't give us a quick one-sentence summary and ask the board to fill in all of your arguments for you. If you want it, you have to detail your arguments yourself.
Right.
I think I have a slightly different take on this, and that is the fact that the applicant has agreed to have the property be under their name, and they will no longer. Our concern was that this was an application filed by a tenant, and not sure whether the tenant would have a lease. So in response to that, the applicant was trying various versions, and the last version that is before us today is that the synagogue will be selling this property to Project Witness. And Project Witness would be the sole owner of this property, and therefore the issue of the question of the application to a tenant becomes moot. The applicant will be Project Witness. They will own and manage, and our resolution, everything will be directed towards Project Witness, and whatever restricted deck or any other legal documents we would have with Project Witness. So I thought I was satisfied with that. And the other part is, I think at the last hearing, we had asked them to provide more in a narrative format as to how the two uses could not coexist and the reasons for it. The applicant started working in its application, did formulate that. If they could elaborate on it, I would be satisfied with it. I think the direction that they're going is the right direction, is that these are two uses that they have said that they have completely different needs, and the fact that, one is a very clearly a religious institution, and the other one being an academic institution, and the operation of the two cannot be disturbed from the religious institution, cannot be disturbed by the academic institution. I think they mentioned that if they can beef that up, that would be very helpful. But other than that, I thought I was satisfied with it.
Mm-hmm. So my main problem is self-created hardship, right? So we have applications where, many applications, where a tiny site comes in, it's a 20 by 100 lot in a district where you're required to have 8-foot side yards. And they say, what are we supposed to do? It would be a 4-foot wide building, you need to give us a variance. And we say, well, prove you're unique, because there's tons of these 20 by 100 lots, right? And they go around the neighborhood and they say, oh, look, there's only 3 20 by 100 vacant lots, and all the rest that are 20 by 100 are owned in tandem with the neighbor. So even though they're not one zoning lot, it's common ownership. And you can tell that because there's a swimming pool on it, they park a car on it, the garden extends, all that sort of stuff, right? So this situation, it's commonly held. And the fluidity between this Project Witness group and the synagogue is clear because they're willing to enter into a lease, and then the next day to merge the corporation, and the next day to sell half, and all of that kind of thing. So it underscores for me common ownership. And my fear is that if we say, just like on that other case, if we say you come with common ownership and then you subdivide for a synagogue or a house of worship, for a house of worship or a school, then it's tantamount to saying that we're abandoning this principle of self-created hardship when the lots are held in common, which, by the way, is supported by the courts. And so that, for me, it's the slippery slope. It's not that I don't think this is a great project, it's a great service, all of that kind of thing. It's really the issue of what happens for board projects going forward, right? So, and to say, oh, well, because we had that in another case where they said, well, I'll just sell it to my son, or sell it to my uncle, or whatever it is, and then it'll fix it. And maybe I should have just sold it to my uncle yesterday before I came here. That's why we look back to 1961 to see what were the transactions that went on between 61 and today to determine whether the hardship complained of was self-created.
And we're not saying that they can't overcome
Yes.
self-creation. We're
Right.
clear that through programmatic needs, you can overcome failing the self-created hardship finding, but you've got to detail that to us.
Right.
And they haven't done it. One sentence, literally one sentence about this is secular and this is non-secular is not enough detail to overcome the self-created hardship finding.
And for me, a narrative, I think visually, I need the visuals. I need the sketch that shows why it doesn't work, because I can design it in my head to work. So, where it's very clearly distinct, because it's a corner lot. It'd be different if it was a mid-block lot, then I don't know how you do it, make it a distinct building, but a corner, there are lots of buildings in that kind of configuration where you have that kind of L-shaped relationship where this is one building and this is another, and this one reads separate because they're two separate buildings. Anyway.
I'm sympathetic with the project, but I believe low is low, and I urge the applicant to give it a try and try to prove that he's not meeting the programmatic needs on a combined lot. I believe this is the way to go now and save time and effort, so.
And I think it's really unfortunate because we asked them to do this in February. Had they done it and really focused, I'm guessing they could have made their argument, and then today would have been a vote, right? It's really unfortunate. I wish applicants would just listen to us when we give an instruction and not sidestep, and if they don't understand what we said, then to call the project manager or call Carlo or L'Oreal and find out. I didn't
sometimes
understand what they meant by that, find out more clarity.
Sometimes they listen, but it takes some time to
But
get
it shouldn't, it's a shame, right? All right. Also, just in terms of that, which is the other part that's a shame, is all the seeker review is done. Normally, that's what would hold us up, but it's not.
Item number 16, 2016, 4217 BZ, 1665 Barfield Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, we had an open issue with proof of continuous use on this from 2008 to 2011. There's an affidavit from an attorney stating that the use was active until eviction in March 2009. There's a September 2009 fire department violation for failure to maintain tank leak detection system. And then we jumped a year later to November of 2010, where there's a fire department permit and invoice for buried tank site inspection. So by 2011, there are proofs of normal operations where we see tickets for delivery of fuel and receipts for purchase. So I know that Commissioner Otley Brown was particularly concerned about the proofs. Are those proofs? Do you
No.
see those proofs? No.
No, and here's the reason why. The 2009 violation for failure to inspect gasoline storage leak detection systems. My question, and this is probably to the fire department if they're here, is can you get this violation if your site is not operational?
Right.
The reason why I asked this is because the lawyer said the site was occupied till eviction, but the violation was written out to the previous owner, BP Amico. That's no longer the owner now. Now it's Waves and some kind of private owner. So the question is, could this have just been issued to a site that was kind of decommissioned? And then issued to the previous owner, because there was no owner that was made public at this time, in which case then that's not proof of continuous use.
It's like, was it like an automatically generated kind of violation?
Well, was it
or-
that they saw a site that was vacant and not operational and was like, well, gee, I wonder if any of this stuff, the leak detection is working or
okay.
anything? It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
seem like anybody's doing anything, let's just issue a
there's an
violation.
owner.
Previous owner was BP Amico, we'll
Yeah.
issue it to them. They could put this to bed by getting a letter from BP Amico saying it was operational because the violation was given to BP Amico.
Right.
So then BP Amico will either say, that wasn't ours, we were no longer in business at that time, or they will say, yes, we were continuing to operate.
Right.
And the fact that the next violation was October 10th, 2010, which was resolved with the FDNY inspection of tanks, leads me to think that, was this the resolution to the 2009
Right.
violation? And they finally were up and running again in October 2010, and so they had the inspection done and everything's done and well and good. So I still have questions about that, questions that could easily be answered or not.
Right, and we had also suggested going to Con Ed, their utilities, were the lights on, right? Who was paying, sometimes an eviction that you keep the lights going, I don't know, it doesn't mean it's operational necessarily, but at least the lights are on. Yeah, so I was actually surprised that they were just going on those kind of strange records as opposed to, and then they hand us a receipt for delivery of fuel, so how were you operating in 2009
With no
without a
fuel
fuel
delivery. Right,
Right.
it's like some of these raise more questions,
Right.
unfortunately.
Okay. So, but finally, at least, the plans were revised to eliminate the car wash and install a convenience store, yay. Landscaping and fencing is shown along the perimeter and adjacent to residential properties, but there are very few details on these, so we need in-ground planting beds with curbs detailed, that must be provided with minimum front-to-back depth of 4 feet, and minimum planting depths of 3 feet to support the root balls. They need to provide landscape drawings and show the details on how the planting beds are made with curbs. For the fencing, they need to clarify on a landscaping drawing where the fencing is and what type is where. They need to provide elevations of the fencing along the residential property lines and along Tiemann Avenue. And the reason I'm specifically asking for this is because this is really right up against a very residential block. And so the fencing should really be shown to be something that's really nice. And it shows, you know, fencing on top of an existing brick wall or something like that, and that could just be something terrible. So we need to see much more information on that. Anybody else on this one?
Item number 17, 2017-244BZ, 2208 Bowler Avenue, the Bronx.
We received a reduced plan set without modifications needed, except that I still think the plans are missing the notes about window wall attenuation and prohibition on rooftop lighting and amplification. We asked for that a pretty long time ago. The reason that they resubmitted the plans was just because there were so many drawings. We had like 40 drawings and we only needed, 10 or something. But they didn't add those two notes. Maybe they can add them right away. However, I think we still have open environmental. I didn't find the noise sign off. We have WRP and LPC sign off, and the revised EAS was submitted on April 5th. I didn't see our DEP's response to that.
I reached out to DEP. We're still waiting for them to respond. They kind of backed up. So any day now, I'm assuming we should receive them.
That's unfortunate, because this has been going on a very long time. Okay.
Item number 18, 115, I'm sorry. Shoot, sorry.
2018.
2018-52BZ, 159 Borum Street, Brooklyn. Are we calling them separate?
Yes, calling them
Separate,
separate.
yes, yeah, the discussion, well, there's interrelated conversation, but they have to be separate. Okay, well, after 3 hearings over the last 7 months, the project has now completely changed with an increase in unit count and required parking and location of much of the parking off-site. We are discussing the proposal with HPD, since the applicant will not provide us with assurances that the proposed modification of the project is acceptable to HPD's program and regulatory agreement under 421A, but we're having a discussion with HPD shortly. In the prior version that had a 109 by 102 foot cellar footprint, 43 spots were provided on stackers at the cellar, with one space not in a stacker, directly on the ground, and 24 spots were tightly packed, improperly tightly packed, that didn't work, on the first floor at grade. The proposed now has a much reduced cellar that's 86 instead of 109 by 102 feet floor plate, and it has only 26 spaces in the cellar, with most on stackers, 4 on the ground, and 34 spots at the first floor, most on stackers, with 10 on the ground. And I remember our concern, discussed for quite a lot, about the appearance of stackers at grade and how they're mostly, and how the stackers at grade are unsightly. So now they're putting all the stackers at grade, or many stackers at grade, so it kind of looks like a storage space for cars, one of these places where you go to a place where they're selling cars and they have too many to sell. The floor-to-ceiling height of the cellar is only 15 feet, so I ask, why can't the cellar just be excavated further to allow for triple stackers at that level? According to fast research that I did, very fast, that would be a 22-foot floor-to-ceiling height to accommodate one of those stacker systems, triple stacker systems. And they said that they pulled the building, they reduced the depth or the width of the cellar to avoid underpinning the adjoining building, but they pulled it away by 23 feet. I don't see why you need to be 23 feet away to avoid underpinning your adjacent building. Make it 8 feet or something like that, then there's room for some stackers. I also don't see a 10-space reservoir area at all, which we discussed at the last hearing, which is required. And there appears to be, based on the parking study, a shortfall of 5 spaces based on demand in the averaged census tracts. These are actually, I have to say, kind of redundant comments and questions from me based on prior hearings, so it's like starting all over again. And it's pretty frustrating because we've been at this for so long. And so, and I asked, what if instead of a ramp, there were an elevator, since this has to be valet parking now? That would free up space for more cellar parking. And don't forget, there's a lot of market rate housing in here, so it's not that this is all low income or even affordable housing. They need to provide a copy of the restrictive deck for the proposed off-site parking, which is the Johnson Street location. And by the way, we struggled, and I'll talk about this later, but we struggled with the project on Johnson about it not meeting its demand. And so all of a sudden now it can handle an additional 30 spaces for this building. And why are the floor-to-floor heights different in the residential tower? I was just curious about that. They range from 9'9" to 10'9". I hope that's based on structural issues and not on the idea that market rate housing will have higher floor-to-floor heights, because that's just simply not allowed.
I don't think they're allowed to anymore. I think they have to have affordable on every floor that there's market
Yes.
anyway. So if they are higher on some floors, then the affordable
gonna have to
apartments
mix
will get
it,
the
right.
benefit as well.
Right, I know that that's the case. I don't know why the floor-to-floor heights are different, and if they're different, it could just be structural, that some kind of a transfer beam is going on or something like that. A revised restrictive declaration was provided to us stating that if the income-restricted units in either the existing Section 8 building, excuse me, or on the zoning lot, or the 32 income-restricted units in the subject building cease to be income-restricted, parking will be provided pursuant to the zoning resolution. I'd like to just fix a little bit of that careful lawyering of that language so that they run in parallel. So the language should be, quote, if any of the 42 units in the existing building, unquote, and then there's some little filler that they had, or, quote, if any of the 32 units in the proposed building, unquote, cease to be income-restricted housing units, then the required parking will be provided. I don't want a misreading of what happens to the units in the subject building to be different than what happens to the units in the Section 8 building. So the language should be parallel. And those were my comments. Anybody else? No comment, anybody?
I just have a question about the operations as to what will happen for the parking spaces in Johnson. How are they accessed? Will the tenant come up to Burham, leave the car with an attendant in Burham, and that attendant, if it's full, will then go over to Johnson? Or are you going to be directed as a tenant, like parking lot full, go to Johnson? So it's just a question. I have more of a question on the Johnson Avenue case.
Yeah, me too.
Than I do on this case.
Regarding pulling back the building 23 feet, commonly, if you want to avoid underpinning of adjacent structure, and you're digging next to that footing, you would, if you want to avoid underpinning, you would like to move the building, the proposed building, away from the existing one. However, if let's say the adjacent building is at grade, I don't think the distance should be 23 feet, it should be much less.
Right.
Depending on the proposed building excavation depth.
Right.
But if the existing one has a cellar, probably they need to go like further a little bit, but
it's
23 feet
23.
is a lot.
Yeah.
So if they can give us like a cross-section or a sketch explaining why they did that.
Right. Because that's reducing the amount of parking enormously. Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay.
Item number 19, may I go on?
Yeah.
Item number 19, 2018-55BZ, 222 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
And as is above, now we have to look all over again at these plans that magically now have enough room to accommodate 30 more spaces from the Borum site for a total of 76 spaces, but didn't have enough room last we looked, according to the applicant, to meet its own demand of 63 spaces, having a shortfall of 19 spaces. So they were short 19, absolutely couldn't do it. And now they have room for 30 more spaces. So I have to admit that I find this a bit insulting. The board asks that the application be amended to meet demand, is told this is impossible, and then to meet its own needs, finds the spaces by merely adding more stackers. The applicant argues that demand should be reduced based on area projects. With so many moving parts on these two sites, I want DOT to review how this is done instead of having us having the numbers change constantly with new studies. Either we go to DOT to review this, and that takes however long it takes, or the applicant meet the full demand on the two lots, one way or the other, for both sites by adding whatever stackers are necessary, taking out the double stackers at the first floor of Burham, which are unsightly for the neighborhood and I think disrespectful to this neighborhood, and providing the required reservoir spaces, which I also don't see on the Johnson plans. And then I have the same comments with respect to making the language parallel in the restrictive deck.
That's a good idea.
And, yeah, those are my comments. Others?
I agree with you.
Anybody else?
Item number, may I go on? Item number 20, 2018-104BZ, 1234, 1238 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, so, all right, as a threshold matter, we are looking at 50% retention of existing walls on the exterior. I'd like to know how that wall described as a bay window, which is actually a wall, because a bay window is something that's doesn't kind of land. This actually sits on a foundation, and so it's supported by the cellar foundation wall that is now to be removed. So I'd like to know what the plan is to hold that wall up. And the whole idea of holding that wall up is to be existing walls to be retained, right? And then you take it out you take its structure out. And the second floor existing and demolition drawing is still missing enclosing exterior perimeter walls against which you would measure the total perimeter to be retained. And I don't understand that. That's the third time I've made this comment. They also need to add a note on the drawings, the DOB, to verify legality of the existing non-complying 18-foot rear yard. There is a set of drawings that shows that in 1950-something there was an approved project with that 18-foot rear yard, but DOB has to be the one responsible for that. And I do have to say, I don't think the applicant heard me the last time. There is no reason for the rear yard incursion at all for the large addition where the existing house is being completely removed. Ditto for the second floor 20-foot rear yard incursion. A one FAR building on an 8,000 square foot lot is 8,000 square feet, not more. Why is that so hard to understand? And all of these were the reasons for the last administrative adjournment. A direction is a direction, and I don't understand what the applicant's point is in not doing anything that was in the direction. So the architect must come, or we adjourn again, and the next time, I just want to vote it out. The hearing will be very brief to make clear to the architect that the plans must be amended as stated. Dimension on the proposed plans, also the existing walls to be retained. Those numbers should match the demolition drawings, and they don't. And finally, well, it's not so finally, the floor area study, which was the only study provided out of the three we asked for, shows that an 8,000 square foot house is 2 times the size of any of the houses in the study area. One site out of all the others was approved by this board at 6,400 square feet. The subject house at 8,000 square feet is too big and reads like a giant house. The removal of rear yard incursions as instructed will bring the floor area closer to the size of the largest house on the block, and modifications in the massing can make it appear as if it were 2 houses instead of one enormous one. We also asked for frontage, lot coverage, front yard, and side yard studies, and for justification about the massing and neighborhood character impact, and we didn't receive any of them. So, as I said, this is the last time we'll hear this without seeing the project modified. Okay. And I think Commissioner Schomburg.
I think my concern was more with the massing of the building as it appears from the 22nd Street frontage. This neighborhood has a very uniform set of buildings on 35-foot lots. And while this building is merging 2 of those lots, one of the portion of the building does seem to accentuate it, but the rest of the building in the back tries to extend it in a very horizontal manner, which is different from the rhythm that one sees in this neighborhood. So I would strongly recommend that the applicant breaks the massing of the building in the front to make it appear like 2 buildings. And I think the plan allows for that. And there are ways to do that so that the horizontal roof line is broken up with 2 more vertical kind of emphasis point, and reduce the roof line in the back to make it appear so such a strong presence on this block frontage. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so, I mean, and I think by making those changes, it will reduce the floor area and get it closer in line with that one large house on the block.
Which is still really big for the community.
It's still really big for the community, which is, so that one large house on the block, I actually don't remember what that one looks like, but the idea of treating this as two very separate houses with like, I mean, you know, architecture does this kind of stuff all the time, a glass connector so that you're not reading the houses as one gigantic mass, where the roof is set back very far and maybe the roof treatment is different. You know, it's not as high at that middle point where it's the connector. And the connector is wide enough. Right now, the connector is only 6 feet wide. If the connector were wider and to read as if you've got a yard going between these two structures, that might sort of alleviate the apparent hugeness of the building. And that's one reason we needed the frontage studies.
Good. Item number 21, 2018-109BZ, 9-344th Road, Queens.
Just a second.
It's adjourned.
Oh. All right. Yes, they requested an adjournment to allow further study of the project by DEP and DOT, which is a big study.
Child safety. Item number 22, 2018-171BZ, 1 East 70th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we received subsequent to the last hearing, 6 letters in support and 2 in opposition, plus submissions from the 2 opposition councils prior to this morning or last night or whatever it is. So last night, apparently, there was a submission by an opposition council which we cannot admit into the record. We did get a letter from counsel for the applicant who made a note that it was a late submission, but we can't admit it into the record because we had a briefing schedule. They were supposed to comply with a briefing schedule. The hearing has not closed, so to the extent that anyone wants to give testimony about whatever their position is, if there's any new information, then they can make it at the hearing. Okay, so commissioners don't have to like, scurry and read a gigantic submission or whatever it is. Also, board members and staff, along with counsel and architect for the applicant, opposition counsel, and a community representative went on a visit of the Frick's back of house areas as opposed to the public areas that everyone can see if you buy a ticket. This included visits to the cellars, conservation areas, and library stacks. And it's very clear to me that the Frick staff is working under very extreme conditions, many in tiny spaces that are inadequate for the task, many with abnormally low ceiling heights, limited or no ventilation, and limited or no natural light. I marvel actually at their ability to work under those conditions. The offices that are well situated are on the 2nd floor and are to be given up to allow the public's access to the Frick family's former bedrooms and sitting rooms and allow for increased gallery spaces. The space lost there needs to be made up somewhere. And we actually met someone who, I think she'd been working there for 25 years in a space that was smaller. It's not actually a space large enough to hang your clothes, I don't think, because like if you have the hangers, I don't think you can get in front of the clothes to see them. So that was impressive.
A walk-in closet.
It wasn't even a walk-in closet, and that room had kind of an odd little window situation, but wow, 25 years in that space, that's somebody who loves her job. So circulation through the several layers of additions is complex. This is based on the site visit, inefficient and inaccessible to the disabled. Artwork has to be transferred from elevator to elevator. They break down, they're too small, et cetera, et cetera. Opposition makes much of the Frick's claim that natural light is not necessary, or sorry, Frick's claim that natural light is necessary for many of its operations, focusing far too long in its papers on the Frick's desire to provide its education classroom with natural light. The one room in question is at the first floor facing the 70th Street Garden. It is 900 square feet. It is well situated with direct access from 71st Street, which is being treated as the school entrance as distinct from the general visitor entrance on 70th Street, which makes sense because schools always come with big crowds and it's hard to manage the kids with all the visitors who are coming in smaller, and I think that will alleviate a lot of their collisions, right? So that entrance is, the education room, its location links directly to the main reception hall, so it can obviously multifunction. And it is in the best location for functionality, completely independent of whether it has windows onto the garden. All of the rest of the educational spaces are windowless interiors, so I'm not sure what all the focus on that is about. Also, the concern about food facilities that opposition expresses is odd because the Frick already has a kitchen and staff cafeteria. These are currently located down the hall from the art archives room and prep rooms. Their relocation will be in newly excavated area and will be isolated from art functions with separate access and elevators. The comments are curious because if just looking at the plans without even a visit would have revealed that. I think the architect for the applicant did a very clear job of explaining the deficiencies in the Halpern proposal, and in architect Halpern's defense, it's always difficult to design a project when you don't have all the facts. So that architect couldn't have known where the structural issues are, where the mechanical issues are. None of that is available unless you're really inspecting the building and doing elaborate site studies. With respect to the music room, it's something I personally lament. While I understand the desire to lose the curved walls if the space is to be converted to exhibition use, I nonetheless wonder why it couldn't be retained. This is just a question of, even though it's not within the scope of of the requested grant, right? It doesn't require additional floor area. Well, putting in that, the floor above does, but you could arguably not affect that space. Replacing the skylight with a light box and building above, floor above, I'm just curious why that couldn't be done. And then we do have open seeker issues. The additional materials that were provided by the applicant on construction impacts have been submitted to the appropriate agencies for review. So all of the sort of affected agencies in construction impact review have been contacted and will review that material. And also consideration of seeker requirements with respect to interior spaces will be addressed by LPC's seeker, also SHPO officer. That was a comment raised by opposition counsel, and I want to make sure that LPC has carefully looked at whether the interior spaces might be eligible for state or national register listing, which has an effect on the analysis. So we do have hazmat sign-off. I think I might have gone through all those. We have sign-offs for everything else except for, and Parks Department, we still have an open.
They just emailed me and said they have no further comments.
Oh, okay.
Just now.
Okay. So we have sign-off. Anybody else?
So thus far, whatever we have reviewed and received, I did not receive any new information that was provided by the applicant apart from what has been submitted today, which we haven't reviewed. I found the detailed analysis of the applicant's review of the Halpern plan very helpful and very instructive for me to understand the shortcomings of the plan and what is actually needed for Frick to effectively serve in its, at its current location. I would say that the site visit from the last week further affirmed the need that were identified by the museum. The proposed enlargement has minimized the above-grade bulk to the extent needed in response to the earlier community concerns. I'm talking about a much earlier plan.
Yeah.
And that the proposed enlargement is thoughtful about the neighborhood character and careful in retaining the historic building.
Anybody else?
Yeah, while I thought the submission by the applicant was very thorough again in answering questions that were raised at the past hearing. However, I did find that the site visit was even more helpful for me in that it highlighted how the programmatic needs of the Frick were actually limited by the structural and architectural deficits of the building. So I found that was a very useful time spent.
Yeah, I agree with all what was said. The only concern I have is I looked at the construction schedule, and I'm not sure if 9 months for foundation and superstructure is enough based on the work proposed. I'm not sure if a condition on the construction period would be appropriate here. I'm not sure how even we can
We don't condition
enforce
construction.
this. Yes.
No. Construction takes as long as construction takes.
Yes.
I should
Yes.
explain why that construction timeline was provided. So there's a challenge on environmental quality review, and one of the subjects in environmental quality, that by the opposition, one of the subjects of environmental quality review is construction impacts.
Yes.
So I asked that they prepare a timeline so that, and I think the general contractor also prepared a letter discussing how long it's been taking them to do projects of similar or more complex or less complex to show within the scope of their experience. And then we're giving that to DEP and DOT for them to review to see if, and I'm assuming both of those agencies will have comments, questions, and so that'll be followed up.
Okay, so
Right.
we already passed it to
Yes.
another city agency. Okay, that's good.
Okay, anyone else?
I found the submissions compelling. I believe, though, the site visit really opened my eyes to the current conditions, and it showed that the current request as the current requested addition is entirely reasonable for the conditions that they're currently in. I too, on a personal side, would love to find a way to retain the music room, but that's not something that we have any. Their programmatic needs are their own.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one? Item number 23, 2018-180 BZ, 1441G, South Avenue, Staten Island.
So, we received comments, a lot of them, from DOT about the site, and in particular, the issue of school safety. It's an extensive set of comments. The applicant needs to respond to them, to DOT. And as an aside, I'm curious about the applicant's repeated statements at the last hearing about DOT not being willing to review this site in the face of our conditional approval of the school that required school safety review. In fact, DOT had several times in connection with their school review requested the applicant provide additional information and never received it. We received, just this last Friday, information about the state of construction of the garage. The manufacturer of the precast concrete structure states that they are in the, quote, initial stage of manufacturing the individual precast pieces, unquote, and that the, quote, the drawings have been completed, unquote. Hence, I see, because they've only in the initial stages of manufacture, it's possible to stop continued manufacture of the precast pieces and modify the drawings, because they're only drawings get modified, if DOT school safety determines there's a problem with the project as designed. It was a condition of approval of the school, that the school project submit to school safety review. This was not done. And the apparent explanation for this, based on the Friday submission, is that another unrelated agency told them prior to the BSA's decision of the school application that DOT doesn't have jurisdiction. This was possibly stated by that agency in the context of a seeker review, which is a completely different standard. The school safety review was a condition of BSA's approval and determination that the findings had been met, and DOT was willing to review the project. Now the review is being done, as it should have been, and the garage design may have to be modified if DOT determines there are school safety concerns. I note also that the building permit for the garage is only for foundation work, and there is no permit for the NB, the new building on the garage. Community Board sent a letter also May 24th recommending approval. They had waived their comments at the last hearing. And Fire Department stated, but I don't know if we got a letter, just stated that they had no issues with the project.
Email?
An email. Yeah, just an email. Okay. Yes, any other comments on this one?
I
didn't see the DOT.
No?
It's
Oh.
if you look in school safety folder.
Yes, the school
It's in
safety.
school safety folder.
Right. And it's extremely extensive. They really, really had a lot of comments. And on Friday, the applicant had short paragraphs to respond to DOT's comments, but those go to DOT. That's not for us to decide. So if DOT finds the answer satisfactory, but what we've learned, that DOT wants the, let's say, the architecture and planning to do the work, not school crossing guards, not stripes on the sidewalk, because children don't follow the stripes on the sidewalk, or not on the sidewalk, in the street, so.
I just wanna, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you don't have any comments. No, go ahead. I got you.
So based on the DOT comments, thank you. They don't know whether teleport drive is permitted or not for access or not.
No, so I don't know that about, I mean, for instance, we saw those photographs that shows that you have to turn around at a certain point when you get to like a fence or something like that. So that's DOT to go figure that out. What they didn't want is when you look at the circulation plan, which was one of the things that was sent to them, that we sent to them, the circulation plan has the cars coming out and doing a U-turn to come down Teleport. And DOT is like, how can that be a traffic pattern that you do a U-turn? Like you drive to the fence and then you turn around and you go the other way. So they don't want to see U-turns as part of the.
And that's what the buses do right now, because that's what the applicant had provided in terms of the bus circulation, right?
Well,
specifically the
buses,
bus.
so
Drop
MTA buses, school
Right, the
buses,
MTA bus.
and cars, right? So the idea that you're designing a place where you must do a U-turn is, I agree, is fairly bizarre. I can't speak for what the Port Authority, why they need to close that, I don't have any idea, but obviously the circulation pattern is a problem for DOT.
Sorry, Commissioner Shin.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that last hearing, we did ask for the structural plans, and
Yeah.
we did ask for a letter from the structural engineer. I believe that the secret of modifying the building is the structural engineer's secret. It's not the manufacturer of the precast units. Instead, we got this letter from the precast concrete manufacturer,
Right.
which indicates that any changes, it was like this, changes to the configuration of the precast units would derail the project. I'm not
Right.
sure what the word derail mean to a structural project here, But derail is like, the project is gone, and I don't believe this is the
No.
word to use here.
He made it very clear. He said, we're making the panels now for this garage. This garage is in line for us to be in production, right? If we had a delay, they step out of line, and we won't be able to put them back in line until whatever, we put them back in line, right? That's construction. That's the world of construction, right? But, you know, the other thing that I wanted to point out was, I don't know where it is, was about the amount of parking that's actually required. So, there were lots of changes to this project, and so the shortfall on parking to allow occupancy of the Commons 3 is very small, actually, because the school there's no parking requirement. They calculated parking requirements for the school, and they used the wrong standard. For one, it's an M1, so schools aren't allowed an M1 without a permit. But even if they were, schools don't have a parking requirement in C districts, and in only seminaries do. This is not a seminary. So they used a seminary standard to calculate the parking for the school. So actually, there's 0 parking requirements for the school. It's only for the office building portion. It, of course, depends on what you're doing in there, but if you just assume office building, which is how they filed. So their shortfall is, so the Schedule A says 454 surface spaces, so that makes them short by 214 spaces. But the chart on the drawings that were submitted says 525 surface spaces, so therefore there's only 143 short. So I don't actually know how many spaces they're actually providing because the information is all over the place. And, you know, one way that because what the owner is representing is he won't be able to open his building unless he has this parking garage built, right? But the shortfall is so small that you could get a TCO where one of the floors just isn't occupied, and therefore waiting for the parking garage to be done, right? But you can see also that the parking garage goes up really fast, right? So even if it were delayed and takes a while to get back online, you get back online. I don't think it stops the completion of this building, the installation of the school, which has 0 parking requirements. I don't know if there's any tenants already for the office space, so they could get a TCO for the school and move the school in September, I mean, I don't know if the building will be done in September, but argue. Yeah. So-
Yeah, I guess the derailed word caught my attention as well. I'm not sure if it meant that they being off track. I'm not sure the size of this institution that's creating this frame, and whether or not they would have to destroy the frame that was made and have other clients that they wouldn't be able to fit into the schedule any longer. I think I'd want a little bit more information on what the actual status of what's going on is in question to me.
Right. Well, you know, having been in construction, as Commissioner Sheta has, when you lose your place in line,
That's what I'm worried
you
about.
eventually get back online. It's true that you might have to wait a few months, but that's what happens when you lose your place in line. Why do you lose your place in line? Not just BSA. You lose your place in line because you get a stop work order because the fences aren't right or whatever. You lose your place in line because one of your contractors didn't renew their insurance, and so the permit is pulled by DOB. There's so many reasons why a job gets stopped and you lose your place in line, right? Or maybe you don't, there's a problem with funding, and the guy who's manufacturing stops you because, you know, there's so many reasons why you lose your place, so it's not an unusual situation. And that's why I'm like, well, you could still open your building even if the garage isn't finished for 6 months, because your shortfall is relatively small relative to all the spaces that are available on the site, right? Plus, the other thing I noticed was they're tapping into spaces that are not on this zoning lot as part of their satisfaction of the zoning requirement, of the parking requirement. So at one point, they had 10 spaces on the adjacent zoning lot, and another point, there were 40 or something like that. So it seems to be that there are spaces on the adjacent zoning lot that are not required by the existing buildings there, and so that might even satisfy all of the shortfall. I mean, because I don't know, because they didn't give us that information. And all this has to do with school safety, which, by the way, is a condition of the school's approval, which they chose to ignore. Okay. Done? Yeah.
Okay, new cases, item number 1, 2018-191BZ, 215 North 10th Street, Brooklyn. This case is being postponed, they're going to redesign.
Oh, it's postponed for redesign. Oh, okay.
I think they're doing a redesign or something, or changing the project, something like that, if I remember.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
This has been,
My famous words. This concludes the public review session for June 3rd, 2019.